Hello, alternate angles readers. In this video, we're going to be looking at the problem that I talked about in my Digging Deeper column. This is from the 2021 Canadian Intermediate Mathematics Contest, question number B2. And the parts that we were really interested in were parts B and C, which dealt with first two tangent circles that are tangent to a line. And in the third part, we're looking at a third circle that's tangent to the two circles and the line. And we'd gone through and talked about various parts of the problems and generalized some of the things. And we looked at how to sort of simulate those tangent circles in Desmos. And what we're going to look at today is how to do some of this in GeoGebra. And what we're going to do is we're going to start out with something that's going to resemble what happened in Desmos. That's fairly straightforward. And then we'll sort of go to a little bit more sophisticated level using GeoGebra to sort of make this thing a little bit more interesting and a little bit more involved, and we'll look at a couple of the features of GeoGebra as we do it. So let's pop over to GeoGebra. I'm using the desktop version. I prefer using it. If you want to use the online version, that's fine. Couple of things that I'm going to do. Number one, sort of as a default, GeoGebra has this feature that when you sort of go past things, it tells you what they are, which is kind of nice when you're constructing things. But when you're doing a video, it's a little bit of a pain because as you're talking about things and pointing to things, it's always flipping up labels of things. So I'm going to turn that off. And we do that by going to the options and advanced. And it's over here in the preferences for the graphics. So if you click on the preferences for the graphics, this thing down here, preferences for graphics, it's called tooltips. Right now it's automatically comes on. I'm just going to turn it off so that now when I hover over things, it's not going to have labels popping up all the time. The second thing I'm going to do is, again, in the options, I'm just going to change the font size to 24 just to make it a little bit easier for you guys to see. So, back in the article when we looked at Desmos, we had created a couple of sliders to represent the radii of the two circles. And sort of the first circle we had set up so that it's tangent at the origin and that its center is on the y-axis. We're going to do the same thing in this case. So I'm going to set up a slider. I'm just going to click here. I'm going to call it, just like in the article, I'm going to call it capital R. It's going to go from, I'll make it 0 to 10. There it is. And what I want to do is I want to set up a circle whose center is on the y-axis and whose radius is this r. So I'm going to come down to the input and just type it in directly. I'm going to use O for center, which is kind of standard. So I'm going to use O, but since we're going to have a bunch of different circles, I'm going to do subscript and call this O sub big R. And I'm just going to type in what its coordinates are going to be. It's going to be on the y-axis, so it's going to have an x-coordinate of 0. And the y-coordinate is just going to be the radius of the circle, that big R. So if I do that, I get this point on the y-axis. And if I come over here and pull this around, we see that it moves. Now let's just move our view down a bit so that we can see that this thing is going to adjust. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to build in my circle. So I'm going to go over to our circle tools, And I'm actually going to use this circle with center and radius. So if I click on that, it wants to know where the center is. I'm going to use that as the center. And now I'm going to use that R. So big R is going to be my radius. And now, again, we have that first circle. Okay. Now, another thing that I like to do, it's just sort of my preference. If we go to the algebra here and we see some of the options, the second option here, sort objects by. Right now it's set up for construction order. In other words, the list that we see on the left-hand side of all of our objects is in the order that we construct them. As you get more and more things, sometimes it's hard to remember when you constructed things and where it is. So I kind of like to do them by object type. By object type. So that all of my points are together, all of my numbers, my line segments, and so on, so that if I'm looking for a line, I can find the subdivision and find it in there. Okay. And again, that's just a personal thing. Okay, so we want to come and do the second circle. So I'm going to call this one little r, again 0 to 10. Okay. If we pop over to the article, we saw that in the article, the distance between the 2 points of tangency was 2 times the square root of the product of the radii of the two circles. So what we're going to do is we'll go back to our here. I can just type that in. I'm going to go and I'm actually going to set up a variable. I'm going to call it d equals 2 times the square root of big R times little r. And then we'll do the same sort of thing. I'm going to have the center that I'll call O of little r. And now the point of tangency is d along the x-axis, and the radius is going to be little r, so the y coordinate is going to be the little r. So it's going to be d comma r. And again, we get that point, and we see if we play with our slider, the center of the circle is going to move. And if we do the same sort of thing as we did before, the center and radius, and now I use little r, there we go. So we have our two circles that are tangent and tangent to the x-axis. And again, just a personal preference. Since I'm doing something geometric, I don't want to see all of the axes and stuff in there. It might help to create the sketch, but once I'm doing the sketch and once I've created it, I don't need to see that anymore. So if I click to the graphics view here, I'm going to turn my axes off, and I'm going to turn the grid off, which means I probably want my tangent line, which was the x-axis. So down in the input, I'm going to type in y equals 0, just the equation of that. And there I go. So I've got my two tangent circles. Now let's even go the next step and put in that third circle. So from the article, we saw that when we do the third circle, a couple of things happened. We got its radius, was this expression here. It was the product of the two radii of the other circles with this expression down here. So let's go to GeoGebra and actually put that in. So I'm going to call this R sub 3. And it was going to be the product of these two, R times R, divided by brackets R plus little r plus 2 times the square root of big R times little r. So there's our new radius, r sub 3. And the other thing we saw was the distance between, now this is the distance between the point of tangency of the first circle and the new little circle. And here R1 and R2 is the first circle and the second circle. So this is going to be my big R and my little r. So that's going to be my new distance. So if we go back to here, I'm going to type in d sub 2. And that's going to be big R times the square root of little r divided by the square root of big R plus the square root of little r. And again, now the center of the third circle, so I'm just going to call that O3. The x coordinate is going to be this D2, and the y coordinate is going to be my R3. And that doesn't look right. Wait, let me see. Oh, it's 2. I forgot my 2. So let's go to my distance here. I go to the properties, and I had r times r over all that stuff. It should actually be 2 times that. There we go. And now we can do the same sort of thing. Circle with center and radius. O, and now it's going to be r sub 3. And there we've got our third tangent circle. Pull this down. And now those three things work in tandem. Okay, so next we'll look at doing this in a little bit more of an interesting and more sort of organic way.